Hi, I'm Anne-Marie from brambleberry.com, and I'm here today to answer all of your questions about how to use colorants in your bath and body products. Playing with colorants is one of my favorite things to do because it's where we turn the science of making products into an art form. There's lots of different options though, so it can be a little confusing. Before we dive into your specific questions, I did want to go over all the options we have for coloring your soap and bath and body products. Powder colorants are the most common of the soap making colorants you can use. And generally there are two kinds, pigments and oxides and micas. Powder colorants are definitely the most common colorant for use in cold process soap, but they can be used in quite a wide variety of products, everything from masks to scrubs to even bath fizzies. First, we're going to talk about micas. Now, micas are a fine, shimmery powder that works for cold process soap as well as a lot of different makeups and lotions and masks and a whole variety of products. They are a naturally occurring mineral, though they can be manufactured in a lab, and they're generally a flat platelet that can be coated with a pigment or a food coloring. Now, are micas considered natural? Well, it's important to consider what the coating is. Mica on its own is considered a natural product. However, if it's coated with an FD&C color, food, drug, and cosmetic color, that wouldn't be considered natural. Or if it's colored with a pigment or an oxide, that would be considered natural. But what is natural and who actually regulates it? Well, that term's a little bit up for grabs and is a little ambiguous. Now, the majority of Brambleberry's micas are considered natural because they are either colored with the mica or they're colored with a naturally occurring pigment or oxide. But if you ever want to learn more, just click on the product page and a full description, including the ingredients listing, is always there. Pigments, on the other hand, are powder colorants that are made from oxidized metals like iron and titanium. Compared to micas, they're not as fine, as in like small grained, and they don't have any shimmer. They're a matte color. A little bit goes a long way. These colorants are very concentrated. Interestingly enough, pigments and oxides are considered a nature identical product. They are considered natural, but they are manufactured in a lab to avoid the impurities that are found when you dig them out of the earth or grind them from rocks found in the earth. Generally, I recommend using pigments and oxides in cold process soap because they can be just a little bit tricky to mix into water soluble products. And honestly, because of how strong they are, they often end up leaving streaks if you use them in your lotions. Because of their clumpy texture, I like to pre-mix my oxides and my pigments with a little bit of lightweight oil. Typically, I go 1 teaspoon of colorant, so 1 teaspoon of my pigment, and 1 tablespoon of lightweight oil. And a lightweight oil would be something that has a long shelf life because in case you don't use all of this, you're probably going to want to save it. So something like avocado oil or sweet almond oil works great. To disperse, just put the pigment into the oil and use a little mini mixer and mix that up and get rid of all those clumps. You can pre-mix your micas as well with a little bit of oil and a little mini mixer, or you can add it directly into your soap at either thin trace if you're doing cold process soap, or once the soap is melted if you're doing melt and pour soap. Another thing about micas in melt and pour soap is a lot of people like to mix their micas with isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol. This helps to disperse it more evenly and easily in your melt and pour soap. The usage rate for that is 1 teaspoon of mica to 1 tablespoon of isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol. Usually when I'm doing melt and pour soap, I tend not to do pigments or oxides in my melt and pour soap because these do tend to clump a little bit in the melt and pour soap. Also, interestingly enough, they're not see-through, so they go opaque and cloudy in there anyways. However, if you do want to use an oxide in your melt and pour soap, we do have quite a few of the oxides pre-mixed into these cool things called color blocks. Brambleberry manufactures these color blocks, and they are fully dispersed colorants that are put into a little bit of melt and pour. To use them, all you do is just shave off a little bit of the side and put it into your melted melt and pour and let the heat from the melt and pour melt your color directly into the soap. This is a really easy way to get clump-free, concentrated color into your melt and pour soap. So one last category I'm going to touch on is liquid colors. And so these would be things like lip balms and lab colors. Lab colors are really, really concentrated FD&C, food, drug, and cosmetic colorants that are dispersed into basically water with preservative in them. What you'll find with lab colors is, well, they're very strong, they're very bright, but they do bleed. That means the color migrates from, like if you want it to be right here, it will migrate out to the rest of the soap. And so that's one of the downsides to using lab colors. The real positive though is they're very bright and you don't have to use very much to get a very bright color. Lab colors are often used for lotion making and anything that's water soluble like melt and pour soap. Lip balm colorants are specifically made by Brambleberry.com to mix into your bath fizzy mixture. They're made of very highly concentrated FD&C, food, drug, and cosmetic, or DNC, drug and cosmetic dyes that get mixed into glycerin so they don't set off the fizzing reaction in your bath fizzy early. Because lip balm colorants are water soluble and mixed in with glycerin, they also tend less to stick to that kind of ring around the tub that people get. This is because they're water soluble and not oil soluble. I hope this cleared up some of your questions around colorants. Now, I did ask for questions earlier, so I'm going to answer some of your questions right now. So our first question is, how do I know how much colorant to use? So that's a really good question. These are two different soaps that obviously are very brightly colored, and how did we figure out how much to add? Couple things. One, what you see is what you get. So always start little and go up because you can't take the color out again. Two, generally the color swatches on the Brambleberry site, if you go to individual product pages for the pigments, the micas, lip balms, there's always a color swatch of how that colorant looks in soap. It's usually 1 teaspoon per pound of soap that we've used for that. And so what happens if you use too much? Well, all hope is not lost. First of all, if you use too much, your soap could lather colors. You could also stain washcloths. Not very much fun. So what you'd want to do if you use too much soap is you just grate that soap right up and you turn it into like a confetti soap. So you would put the overcolored soap in, say, a white base and just turn it into a confetti soap. Because really, when it's soap, it's usually never totally all hope is all lost. Long story short, of course, coloring your soap is the art part of the science, right? It is an art form. So do a little bit of testing, start small, and have fun with it. So the next question is, will using too much mica affect how long it takes for that soap to cure? I love the way mica looks, that shimmer and shine. It's so beautiful, but no, that's not going to affect how long it takes your soap to cure at all. If you're noticing that you feel like when you use mica in your soap, it's taking longer to cure, how much extra oils are you putting into that soap? Are you dispersing a lot of mica into a lot of oil and then accidentally adding too much super fat? That's the question I would be having, because no, adding micas to your cold process soap should not affect cure time at all. Now, if you're really concerned about this and you're working with a very kind of small super fat or too much super fat already, you can actually add the mica directly to your soap, either into the oil phase if it's just one color, or you could also add it directly into your soap when the soap is at thin trace. And when you do that, you want to make sure you trap the mica underneath your stick blender and get all those air bubbles out, and that way you can disperse the mica really easily that way. Another question that came in was, when do you mix in your colorants, with your oils or at thin trace? So the answer is, it depends. If you're making a tried and true recipe and you know exactly how much colorant to use, you could totally mix it in with your oils to give it extra time. I tend to mix almost exclusively though at thin trace for a couple reasons. One, you are mixing the colorant into something that is opaque. It's essentially a white color. So you have to really take that into account when you're mixing the oil in. Remember, what you see is what you get. Two, I usually am doing more complicated designs, so I'm making a big batch of soap and then splitting it into multiple little batches, and so that allows me to color the little batches the colors I want and not have to have the entire batch be the same color. The one time I'll sort of break that rule typically is if I'm using titanium dioxide in the entire batch, because say I'm making a pastel soap or I just want it to be extra white or whatever, that's the one time I might break that rule, but typically I do mine at thin trace. So one of the other questions that came in was, what kind of natural colorants, meaning herbal-based colorants, really are bright in cold process soap making? This was really fun. I actually did this for my pure soap making book, going over to show exactly what colorants were beautiful and bright after right after being made, and then also after a 5-month cure. So for example, this is alkanet, this is cocoa, this is paprika, spirulina, comfrey, indigo, nettle, rose clay, madder root. Some really beautiful colorant options for you to use if you're going with all natural colorants, meaning herbal based, in your soap. And again, I believe the oxides and pigments also totally count as natural, but if you're totally 100% purist and you want to do everything that has to be found exactly in nature in its natural form, this is a great option for you. Another question that came in is, hey, my micas are coloring the bathtub. What's going on with that? What should I use instead? So any colorant that you use too much of is going to color the bathtub. That includes food, drug, and cosmetic colorants, or the lip balm colors from Brambleberry that are specifically designed for using in bath fizzies. So if you are getting a little bit of colorant in your tub, you can use less. That's one of the options. Or you can maybe do a dual color in terms of your bath fizzy. So do half that's really brightly colored and half that's white colored. So that essentially dilutes the colorant in the tub, but still gives you that really bold colorant effect you're going for. Another thing you could do to help avoid ring around the tub is use polysorbate 80. Polysorbate 80 is an emulsifier. So what that means is it's going to take that colorant and it's going to take the oils that are in the bath fizzy. It's going to help emulsify them, turn them almost into a very, very weak liquid soap. And that helps to prevent ring around the tub because then the product just floats on the surface of the tub and goes down the drain as opposed to sticking to the oils on the side of the tub. If there's oil kind of around the rims of your tub because, well, you didn't clean your tub the last time you took a bath with a really oily bath fizzy, colorant is going to naturally stick to that, as will herbs and that type of thing. So keeping a really clean tub is another way to help prevent ring around the tub. So the next question is, hey, is there a certain temperature that I should use when I'm adding colorant to my melt and pour soap? And the answer is, well, when the soap is melted, yes. So with our house soap base, our SFIC, that's around like 140-ish. And I like my soap to be fluid enough that I really have enough time to mix, because one of the things you don't want to do is have the whole thing go hard on you and then have to pop that soap back in the microwave so that way you can work the clumps out. So when it's liquid and fluid enough that you're going to have a solid 30 seconds to a minute to really mix that in is a great idea. If you're using a color block, I usually add those at the kind of more upper end of the melt point. That way there's extra heat in the melted soap to disperse and melt the color block. So another question is, hey, my red soaps are turning out more pink. And so what's going on with that? So this is the Bramble Berry Perfect Red color block in clear soap versus white soap. And you'll notice that the white soap is obviously a little bit more pink and the clear soap looks nice and red. So keep in mind when you're trying to get a really bright color, and that includes red or that includes a black color, for example, you always want to be using clear soap. And the reason for that is because white plus black equals gray, or white plus red equals pink. And so if you don't want a pastel, start with a really clear soap to start with. So the next question is, how do I know what's going to happen with vanilla discoloration? What do I do about it? The awesome thing about Bramble Berry products is on the product pages for the fragrances, we tell you if the fragrance is going to discolor. The fragrance will often discolor if there's natural vanilla or vanillin in the fragrance. And well, what do you do with that? Couple things. One, you can just work with the brown in the design. So for example, in this one, which is this really cute lemon shortbread design we actually worked with the brown to make the base. And then we added a little bit of titanium dioxide to this one here to make it light. And you can see it really did make quite a difference. So when you're working with something like, say, a vanilla or a vanilla bean or a coffee, those are always going to go brown. And the reality is when you're using fragrance oils, a lot of them actually have natural ingredients in them. And so in that case, both of those colorants are going, or both of those fragrances are going to go brown because of the natural ingredients in them. And so what colors are more likely to be affected? Well, lighter colors, right? Like a light yellow or a light pink or a white is going to be more affected than, say, a darker color like maybe a purple or a brown. So keep that in mind when you're designing your soap. Some fragrances that have vanillin in them or vanilla in them, they'll go a little bit darker brown versus lighter brown. And so doing some test batches, looking at the color swatches on the Bramble Berry product pages is really going to help you as you design your perfect bar of soap. Thanks so much for watching this episode. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so every single time we come out with a new video, you'll get notified. And when you're making products and putting them online, please hashtag them BrambleOn. We'd love to see your creations and get inspired by every single thing you do. Until next time, happy soaping.